Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine große Freude, Sie virtuell im österreichischen Kulturforum Warschau zur Eröffnungsveranstaltung unserer neuen Reihe Digital Future Talks zu begrüßen. Wir werden im Rahmen dieser neuen Serie in Kooperation mit polnischen und österreichischen Partnern Themen unserer digitalen Gegenwart und Zukunft beleuchten. Ich freue mich, dass wir für die heutige Auftaktveranstaltung zum Thema Strategien, Trends und Pläne von Kulturinstitutionen im Schatten der Covid-19-Pandemie gemeinsam mit unserem polnischen Kooperationspartner, dem Institut für Stadtkultur in Gdańsk, Panelistinnen namhafter österreichischer und polnischer Kultureinrichtungen gewinnen konnten, die ich an dieser Stelle auf das Herzlichste begrüße. Frau Direktorin Alexandra Szymańska vom Institut für Stadtkultur wird Ihnen unsere Panelgäste sogleich vorstellen. Lassen Sie mich aus der Sicht des österreichischen Kulturforums Warschau Folgendes kurz vorausschicken. Die Covid-19-Pandemie hat uns von einem Tag auf den anderen von der sogenannten digitalen Zukunft in einen ganz konkreten Upgrade der digitalisierten Gegenwart katapultiert. Für das österreichische Kulturforum Warschau als seit über 55 Jahren bestehende, in Polen bestens vernetzte Kultureinrichtung war schnell klar, dass wir uns diesen neuartigen Umständen bestmöglich anpassen mussten, um unser Hauptziel zu erreichen, mit unserem geschätzten Publikum und unseren geschätzten Partnern in ganz Polen bestmöglich im Austausch zu bleiben. Es freut mich sehr, dass wir allen widrigen Umständen zum Trotz im Jahr 2020 gemeinsam mit über 200 Partnern insgesamt 204 Einzelveranstaltungen in ganz Polen organisieren bzw. unterstützen konnten, live, hybrid oder online. Die besonderen Umstände der Pandemie dauern an. Es war deshalb aus unserer Sicht an der Zeit, genau darüber mit Partnern aus Österreich und Polen zu reflektieren. Und ich freue mich sehr, dass genau dies im Rahmen des heutigen österreichisch-polnischen Online-Dialogs möglich ist. Nochmals herzlich willkommen im virtuellen österreichischen Kulturforum Warschau. Ich darf nun das Wort an die Moderatorin des heutigen Digital Future Talks, Frau Direktorin Alexandra Szymańska, übergeben.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to co-host this talk, because it gives me the opportunity to ask some questions that I keep asking myself, and they are very important, and they are different than the ones that we asked last year in March. A year ago, we were asking questions about what to do, how to survive, whom to help, and today we are functioning differently. We learned to live with the unknown about the future. 2 hours ago, the reality in Poland was different than right now, after the conference of the minister and after new lockdown restrictions were implemented. But I think our reflections are different here and now. We are not only thinking about what's going to happen next, when is the new premiere, but we're thinking about our institutions in the future, how we see culture in the future and the medias that are involved in culture, what sort of contents we want to generate, what sort of know-how we want to share, and what sort of values are going to be key for us. That's why we invited you to talk about the future of the institutions of culture. We will look at the whole system, at the institutions, but in the context of the whole system. I'm not sure whether we will answer the question whether we can talk about new models of action. Is this the time when the quality has changed, the model of functioning has changed? Because I don't mean hybrid form, which is part of our functioning. And it's going to be a very interesting perspective to see Austria and Poland. They are different systems. We're thinking about artists. So We're very happy that our guests accepted our invitation, representatives of institutions from Poland and Austria. They are important and well-known institutions, considered to be progressive, ones that we look up to and that inspire us, institutions that talk about the future, and they've been dealing with the topic of future for quite some time now, thinking about it. So now let me present the guests in alphabetic order. So Sebastian Cichocki, curator, a sociologist, main curator at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw, earlier connected to Bytom Contemporary Art Center and author of numerous exhibitions. Christiane Erharter, also curator, related to Erste Foundation for many years, which presented art from Central and Eastern Europe. She worked in numerous countries, in Norway, among others, but also in Poland. Christiane, you cooperated with our Zachęta gallery, and now she's a curator at Belvedere 21. It's a museum that deals with the art of 21st century. And Christiane is responsible for community outreach program, which is which takes care of the relations with local communities, and I'm sure we're going to come back to that. Paweł Łysak, director of Teatr Powszechny, director, a theater whose motto is a theater that minds, and you are also a co-author of the Polish Directors Guild. You represent institutions, but a certain professional group, directors. And I think that maybe we can exchange our views in this context. Christoph Platz, art historian, advisor to numerous institutions and artists when it comes to their career paths and strategies. From 2018 onwards, you are the main curator at Steinricher Herbst, a festival organized in Graz in Austria, a monthly festival, which is an interdisciplinary festival happening throughout the whole city of Graz, attracting European public. And for starters, let me ask a question in order to refer to your institutions and prefer their profile, because we have people located in Poland and in Austria listening to us. Where are you? So I'm not asking you whether you're in a lockdown in a given location, but where are you when it comes to your strategy? What is your time horizon? How do you plan, and what do you work on, and what's ahead? So now let's comment on our reality here and now. And now let's stick to the alphabetic order, and later it won't matter, but now alphabetic order. Sebastian, over to you. Because you closed, we shut your door starting from Monday. I'm asking about the exhibition, but also in a broader sense. So how do you work and what do you work on? We, as the Museum of Modern Art, we are working in crisis mode from the very beginning. It's an institution that's been developing for 15 years now and even longer. And simply, we are constructing a new building of our museum. Contrary to what's happening outside behind our windows, it is quite positive, looks quite positive. So we are in the state of identity fission. So on the one hand, a lot of other institutions, a lot of our colleagues who deal with culture, well, just like them, we have to work in this hybrid mode of work. On the other hand, we are located in the very center of the city, and we are there's this gigantic building that's growing, and we are supposed to move there soon. So this is the situation, and we have our concerns as regards the future, but it's mixed with sort of joy that something is happening after all, that the building is being built. Now, to comment on what you said about this different point from which we are starting. A year ago, this catastrophe that happened to Homo sapiens was both dangerous as well as exciting at the same time. I remember us talking, me talking to my colleagues, and we presented different visions. We shared fantasies about how we are going to work, that it's going to be more experimental. We were discovering new forms of being together without the possibility of being together. And this catastrophic enthusiasm quickly burned out. I can speak for myself, but I guess we didn't learn too much. I don't think this is the period that I would consider in the category of learning. I would consider it in the category of adaptation. So these are sort of different areas where you need to adapt. If you translate it into biological considerations and reflections, organisms that adapt themselves, and there is this term, and one could consider it in the context of art. There is this term endospore, or this is a secret form and form of an organism where the organism doesn't multiply, it stops different functions and hibernates itself. So it exists in the form of an endospore. So it relates to our institutions as well, because we are dormant, so to say, and because we simply have no possibility to reach out to the public and people using our resources and infrastructure. And we are creating worlds. And I know we meet to talk about digital cultures and digital future, but as a devil's advocate, I would like to point out that our successes are often illusory. Often I come across these opinions that we increased our public sixfold. What does it mean at all? I haven't seen our public for a long time. I don't know what it means that people are watching us, logging in for a moment. Yes, the meters go crazy. Our communication department is very satisfied that there are several fold more people, but I don't think so. I can participate in 3 different conferences and seminars at once in parallel. One thing on my phone, another thing on my computer, and I threw myself at the open resources and seminars offered all over the world. But I'm quite skeptical. And on a finishing note, because it's really interesting what you said. You asked us where we were after a year. Where is our digital enthusiasm and our thrill that we adapt so easily as institutions of culture? So we took a step back in our development, which is a characteristic feature of endospores. So what we were fighting for in the world of museums of 21st century, socially and politically engaged theaters, ethically conscious, sensitive to social injustice, We moved back in our development. On the example of museums, you can explain this in easy words. The fight that we've been fighting for more than 100 years to make sure that 19th century museum model based on passive contemplation of a work of art presented by some group of experts in favor of active participation, damaging certain hierarchies, including marginalized groups. Suddenly, we are contemplating objects and happy that there are queues in front of museums, queues of people who want to be in touch with an object, an exhibit. So we moved back, even though we've had millions of different events online. That's my first comment on where we are.
Thank you very much. Christiane, do you feel the same?
Ja, also
Yes. Well, hello, good afternoon, and thank you. I would like to greet you from Vienna and thank you for the invitation to participate in this discussion. I do share the same feelings that have just been presented, at least in part, but I would like to say a few words about the situation in Vienna. Behind me, you can see a sculpture from the sculpture garden of Belvedere 21. Why am I saying it? Well, the reason is that the garden has suddenly become a very important resource of Belvedere. Belvedere is a palace in Baroque style. It is very well known. It is also a location of a very renowned gallery. Our Museum for Contemporary Art is responsible for the sculpture garden. And suddenly, we have new artists who present their works there. You can see it. I do hope you can see it behind me. This red baseball cap. So what I wanted to say that since the pandemic started, the garden has become more important than before, because in the garden it is possible to organize different events because people feel safer in the open air. So new possibilities have opened up in the garden. So I'm telling you that so that you know why I have chosen this virtual background. And also the way we organize events has changed significantly. Belvedere is a public museum. It belongs to the Republic of Austria. And I have to say that we have been quite slow in terms of digitization of our museum. My colleagues working in the relevant departments realized after the pandemic struck that we have been slow in that regard, and they worked very fast to include digital offers in the program of our museum. They became very active in social media in order to marketing for our offer. Also, a new website was created, and it facilitates digital visits in the museum. Well, in April, May, and June last year, the museums did work, but the number of working hours was limited. It was a regulation that applied to many organizations. People worked for a shorter number of hours, and then they were compensated by the state for the remuneration they did not receive from their employer, more or less. The same applied to our museum. It reopened in June, and there was a political chaos. Ms. Lunacek Our minister from the Green Party had to step down in connection with the crisis. I'm not going to give you the details. In any case, in June, the museums reopened, and then they operated until November. Then another lockdown, so we are closed now, and we will see what's going to happen. The third wave of the pandemic has reached Austria as well. We decided that we want to keep the museum open. Sebastian mentioned these people waiting in queues. Well, actually, we had a Joseph Beuys exhibition opened last month and this month, sorry, and people were queuing to see it. So we are open. It is actually forbidden in Austria to organize live events. It will be made possible in smaller groups than before. As a museum, we are privileged because this ban does not apply to us. The theaters had to close, museums can stay open, and actually the State Opera of Austria decided to take a very radical step. The State Opera is closed. Bogdan Rosic, the new director of the Opera House in Vienna for 1 year now, and he said, okay, if museums are allowed to open, we will open the Opera House as a museum, and we will offer guided tours. And they've been doing that for some time. And now I'm not sure if I have time now to continue talking about it, but this was a general overview. Yes, thank you, Pablo. We have just heard that the situation in theaters is more difficult. Well, actually, 3 days ago, I received a phone call with the question whether or not I want my money back because the theaters were closed. Pavel, as a theater director, could you comment on that? Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation and giving me the opportunity to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to add to your story. When you received that phone call, because it was from my theater, you said that you did not want your money back, that you would rather wait for the performance. Thank you for that, because the thing we are most afraid of is a sort of discontinuity in our relationship with the audience. So if we call someone and they say, no, I don't want my money back, I'd rather wait, it gives us hope. To tell you something about our situation, I would like to quote Jerzy Grotowski, a very important man of theater in Polish culture, when he talked about his theory of poor theater. He would always say that theater can be purified of light, of decorations, it can be purified of costumes, of music. We can purify it of text, even though it would be rather difficult. And what would be left then would be two people facing each other, an actor and a viewer, because this is the core of the theater. And actually, this is what was attacked by the pandemic. This is where the pandemic struck, this couple of people, an actor and a viewer. So we have this deep sense after this year that everything we have been doing is a sort of surrogate, a sort of replacement, a sort of attempt to find a different link, a different connection with the audience. Of course, in a way, we are facing each other now, but it is a surrogate. This is the third theater I'm managing right now, and I do remember cases in my history where I had to call performances off. And let me tell you, this is something we try to avoid at any rate. We try to find replacements for actors so that the performance can take place. And when you have to call it off, it's really traumatic. And actually, we tend to say that an actor's absence during the performance can only be justified by death. I know that it is a radical way of putting it, but maybe it expresses the emotions. And I think in a normal situation, it would take a few lifetimes of a theater director to contain all these cancelled performances. So it was very rare in the past, and now it's radically different. There is a lot of people working in a theater, not only actors, not only audiences. It is a collective work always. Well, for the last months, we have been relieved and happy because we are allowed to play, to perform. And between the 12th of February and the 13th or 14th of April, we had performances. Interestingly, when it was announced that we can reopen, and we announced that we will play for performances, of course, with limited audiences, 50%. And it took 4 hours to sell all the tickets. So people had been really looking forward to it. And once the tickets were available, they went for them. And the actors, they were re-energized. They were euphoric when they heard about it. So I think this is a best picture that shows you how difficult the situation has been for us. Certain obstacles could not be overcome, and despite attempts, we've seen it very clearly in this last month when we were allowed to reopen and perform again. And in contrast, we were able to see that what we were doing in October or November when we were closed were a sort of ersatz, a sort of replacement or an attempt to do something completely different. And now that we are talking about the digital world, we realized how important it is. We were, I believe, the first theater in Warsaw to open a platform on which we show our performances. We invested quite a lot of money to record our performances in high quality during lockdown. We kept working, and we played, also stream our performances. And it was difficult as well. For example, imagine a premiere, and in the audience, you can see the director, 4 cameras, and a few technicians, and the actors are on stage. The actors were stunned. They did not really feel that it was the first night, that it was a premiere for them, and it was difficult. But something that was very important for me, and it made me happy as well, was to see that in a very democratic way, we were able to reach places we had not been able to reach before. And we started gathering information about small towns, for example. Teatr Powszechny has a long tradition. It has been known as a theater of stars and celebrities in the 80s and in the 90s. And when people hear the words Teatr Powszechny, even in small towns, it rings the bell. They've heard about it. They can associate names of actors with it. And now we thought that during the pandemic, we can reach small towns, we can reach people who have never had a chance to go to a theater, even though that they perhaps would like to. And it was very positive. It gave us wings in a way. So this platform and this presence in the internet, it was really nice. The tickets for online performances are very cheap. And when we sell one ticket, it is very clear to us that probably more people will be watching. For example, when we prepared the performance of Flights by Olga Tokarczuk, we know that it happened. It was hugely popular in Krakow, for example, and some people I know called me that yes, we bought a ticket and 6 people watched, and I told them, well, you could have bought a few more tickets to help us make some money. But this is just on a side note. So the digital sphere is interesting, and it is something that's really worth exploring. Theater, or maybe artists working in the theater, they're really hungry for new ideas, and they live on new ideas, and they do want to get involved. They do want to learn about new technologies, and they do want to use this new language. It was like that before the pandemic already, but now even more. Actually, Dream Adoption Society, it is a space that works with VR technology, and they prepare performances with avatars shown online, and actors from other countries take part in these performances as well. So our actors sit in Warsaw, and they work together with actors from Los Angeles and from Korea, and they do something together, and then it is shown on the YouTube. Of course, these are just experiments and attempts to combine real reality with virtual reality. Actually, very recently, their performance premiered in Strasbourg. Very interesting combination, and it makes us very aware as people of the theater that in terms of finance, we are not the forerunners. When we talk about virtual realities, we have to compete against computer games and Netflix, and then we look at our budget, and it is much, much lower than theirs. So I could compare it to a race between a bicycle and a Mercedes. And it is actually scary because there is no way we can do anything about it. The avatars we can produce in our graphic studio are great, but they have to compete with avatars produced by studios that have a budget of millions of dollars. So our platform is forced to compete with Netflix, and well, it's very, very hard.
So you're talking about challenges, which we can talk about later on as well. And I want what I call new models, you refer to as experiments. And now over to Christoph, who has a different mode of action. He's preparing a festival for September and October. Christoph, what's your approach to the festival? Do you plan to change Paranoia TV, or are you thinking about it as one that will happen in the general public space? Oh, thank you so much for your invitation, and I'm really happy that I can talk to you today. Well, I represent Steirischer Herbstfestival in the city of Graz. It was launched in 2018. It's managed internationally, and this is a festival that is an important point that I wanted to say at the very beginning. It's organized starting from 1967 without any breaks. So it's been organized continuously, and it's managed in a multidisciplinary way. And it's organized in numerous languages. The artists that we engage, they cooperate with each other, and it's like a performance and visual art of young people and artists. So it's really important for us it's important for us that we work on an interface between arts, forms of art, where the artist has a possibility of getting involved, finding his or her words, and has the possibility of looking for new worlds. This is a great benefit, especially in this situation. Because we are not attached to any place, any building where you shut the door, or we are not dependent on simply anything, like the festival cannot be just called off like that. And Christian Erhardt said something that I wanted to refer to, namely the governmental. We take into account the support of the government, including short-term work. So yes, we had to go on a compromise, and we are happy to do that in order to serve a bigger purpose. But you have to be cautious here as well, because support is a critical question, actually, because we are artists, and we all know how they suffered this past year. And we are all freelance artists who have suffered this past year. The year has passed, and 2021 will see no events too. So big exhibitions were planned, and there are no events anymore, no exhibitions. They were cancelled, the money was cancelled. And in 2020, ever since the work in 2018, it was put into our hands. So we work looking at a short period of time. We're preparing a new festival, and we offer it for 4 weeks. And we invite international guests and, of course, international artists. So basically speaking, the problem of travel, ban on travel, is much more problematic in our production process compared to reaching out to the public, because we are not located in any building. So we're not showing anything within 4 walls. But on the other hand, I'm quite critical when it comes to the role of artists that has been attributed during Corona, that we are victims, because well, we have these questions of footprint, international mobility, jet set, art consumption. These were important points that haven't been mentioned quite often. I mean, they've been on the table, but nobody paid too much attention today. And today they are very valid. These questions are valid, especially they are valid in the praxis of numerous artists and institutions. So for me, it's one of the critical questions that have to be asked in the context of the festival, namely, how can we reach the public that is not only watching us via stream, but how do we reach this local public, local people? And we are offering them a certain service. We are not located in a single place where we have a limited public. But one more thing that we will be talking about later on. 2020. In 2020, all plans were cancelled almost overnight for every institution, and we simply had to switch to a digital agenda, digital program with physical reference points, of course. We had 2 or 3 events in the theater that were recorded with a camera, but this change in 2020 resulted in a fictional broadcast, and so we were trying to become a Netflix of art. We set up Paranoia TV, a fictitious broadcaster that unites artists that we were inviting earlier on to Graz physically, and now we simply ask them to do things where they are. For example, we had such artists as Tamago Amares, and it is for the first time that they were recording a film on their phone. And also Clemens von Dedemeyer, who also needs infrastructure for his work in order to create and process new films, artistic films, and he needs different locations, so he used to travel a lot. But now he started working with archives, with old materials, and he processed them. So he re-edited those old materials, and he simply used material that wasn't used anymore. And he simply decided to adapt it. And we have other artists who started different discussions, series of discussions. And I agree with the previous speaker that the fact that the public and artists, that their interface it cannot be replaced with virtual reality. We have experienced this ourselves, and simply we understand that it cannot be replaced, this physical presence and physical exchange. So Austria is getting ready for the next lockdown. The incidence rate is 200, so it won't take too much before the next lockdown comes. But what we are facing this year is an even more complex situation. I guess you all understand that because we were trying to find a good solution for 2020. We found a solution whereby we were offering stream, we developed the TV, and we offered different possibilities of downloading and watching different new films. We were ordering different works with artists. And simply, this was not the ultimate solution that would replace the festival. It was simply a program that was created simply due to the new situation. It was very successful indeed. We were broadcasting the films online until the end of the year, and we had really fantastic numbers of views, but then Sebastian already mentioned this problem, and namely the problem of focus and parallelness, the fact that people are watching numerous streams at the same time. So how intensively people are watching that we don't know. Yes, that's right. If I may interrupt you, thank you so much for giving us a few examples of different formats that worked that year. And that's the answer to the question, because I have some questions asked by people who are listening to us. Agnieszka Kudełka was asking about online events that were particularly attractive to the public. But let me rephrase this question. What will stay with us? thinking about diversity, thinking about different way of participation, parallelity, or the fact that our attention is divided into several things. So what will stay with us? That's also a question in the context of VOD platform. Will it stay with us in the future? Or Christiana, this is a question to you, whether the space that you discovered right now as part of the museum, the external space, whether it's going to be one where you will be meeting with the public. And now up to you who answers first and who answers second. So what do you think, what will stay with us and what will make sense in the years to come? Paweł. What will stay with us? If you're asking about the platform, it will definitely stay because it's something that's already functioned. People know about it, and definitely it's a good space for contacting the public and realizing the democratic mission, popularizing mission of the theater. And we will keep doing that. I would like to reverse this question. When I was listening to you about the festival, what came to my mind was a Polish festival that took place in December, and we participated in it. This was a big theater festival, and we invited spectacles from all over the world. And the festival took place online on the internet, and we were showing a lot of plays, all of them in streaming. So thanks to the fact that these plays were presented via streaming, we could save a lot of money. So the authorities cut the funds. They cut some 70% of funds. So it was a really huge amount of money taken away. And then they explained this, saying that there were many more viewers, and that's why you need to follow the progress, technological progress, and you need to save money and use new media. So we have less expenses and more people. And I know that people who are doing this festival are simply concerned that something like that can stay. Then yes, we are not polluting the environment, there's no footprint, we're spending 25% of the money on all that, we have a much bigger reach. So all arguments in favor, and that's a great risk in my opinion, that simply we will not be needed in some areas, or we will be pushed out from some areas, or simply these practices will stay with us, which in some minds, to some people, seem much better, much more modern.
Krystiane, czy ty się odniesiesz do tego myślenia o tym, jak...
Christiane, would you like to comment or maybe say something from the perspective of your activities? What do you believe will stay after the pandemic? How will Belvedere 21 function differently?
Also ich möchte einerseits auch...
Well, on the one hand, I would like to agree with Christoph Platz with what he said. We started planning for the park before the pandemic started, and the pandemic only confirmed that it was the right idea. Because before that, we already saw the garden as a kind of extended exhibition area. Both Sebastian and Christoph were emphasizing this necessity to get in touch with different audiences, of addressing different target groups, including locally. These concerns had been with us before the pandemic started. This is our mission. A museum such as the Belvedere is spoiled by its own success. We have huge crowds of tourists visiting the museums, and these tourists make sure that our budget is relatively high. This museum, just like the Albertina or the historical museum, have huge subsidies and huge budgets, and 70% of this budget comes from tourists. In the future, it may not remain like that. So these institutions are experiencing a crisis, asking themselves, who am I preparing my program or my exhibitions for? And this brings me to the area in which I work. It is called community outreach. We've had it in our museum since 2018. So it started 2 years before the pandemic began. And the objective was to rethink the museum, also rethink its surrounding areas, to give it a new context. Belvedere 21 is located in a highly populated urban area. There is a lot of construction works going on around us. Thousands of new flats are built around us. In the past, the Southern Railway Station was located here. It was very popular among workers coming to work. It does not exist since 2015, though. So also the perception of this area is changing. In any case, a lot is going on. So one of the missions of the community outreach program was to become a part of the change process. And I think this mission is going to expand. I'm very happy to see digitization supporting it. The museum can use its potential and is able to recognize this potential. It knows that it is not the point for people to come and stand in front of a work of art, but instead it tries to support interactive models of participation. So it existed before the coronavirus struck, but the pandemic accelerated this process. Experts who work in the museum use terms such as audience development, inclusion, diversity on a daily basis, and they've been doing it for many years now. But I believe that these concepts and this idea are now finally being taken more seriously because it is necessary. So it's been caused by necessity or forced by necessity. I would like to continue on the subject of being local. Before this discussion, I had a short conversation with Sebastian, and we talked about it. And on the one hand, the understanding of being local or the importance of being local has changed. But also the international cooperations of your institutions have changed. And I'm talking about international cooperation in the sense that you work together with artists from all over the world, you take their perspective, you learn from their perspective, but on the other hand, you reach international audiences as well. So could we talk a little bit more about it? And now, has this changed in one way or another? Do you now operate differently on the local and international front? Well, right now the situation is still quite difficult to define because there are no proper tools that would allow us to tell you the story of the audiences we're reaching right now. I suspect, but this is just my hypothesis, that we keep reaching the same target audience, the same type of person, a person who's interested in culture, but maybe the locations of these people are different now. Maybe they are more local now. And of course, it is connected to the subject of privilege in financial terms, but also in terms of having access to different devices, to the internet, just necessary. Other than that, these people have to be interested in culture and have to have the time and the necessary resources to use culture. And of course, certain formats are easier to transfer to the digital world than others. And all that, in turn, is linked to time-based media or temporal media, as we call it in the Art Academy. Films, for example. Films are very easy to transfer to the digital world. You can watch films online, no problem there. But experiences offered by other art forms we've seen in the last few decades are more difficult to digitize. And this is connected to the question of transferability of what's important in the world of museums. So what I'm talking about is more emphasis of internationalism. I'm not talking about this cosmopolitan aspects, no, not about this international circle of people who share the same values, institutions who operate and try to reinforce certain social movements connected to the rights of women, to reproductive rights, to Antifa, to climate change, etc. Now it is more difficult to work in these areas now that you are actually restricted to the digital world. And it is actually linked to what Christiane was saying. This resource she mentioned in the form of that green spaces, green garden is essential. Our institutions, though we might be going through crises, do have certain resources that we can use. Queen's Museum, one of my favorite art institutions in New York, has always been inclined to become home of different subcultures, for example, hip hop subculture, also different minorities. And now it operates in part as a food bank. So they used their huge building, this resource, to offer other kind of services. Teatr Powszechny, well, back in the days when it was allowed to go to the theater, played a similar role in the sense that you could not define it as a conventional, typical theater. And Paweł actually phrased it very nicely, because once he said, well, a performance happens when people get together. Because when people get together to protest, to go on strike, to occupy a building, it is a sort of performance, isn't it? So this way of thinking about the relationship between an institution and the audience and the public is now difficult to maintain. And the question about international contacts and locality has now become doubly difficult. And of course, we have fallen victim to this excess of the digital world. And of course, the success in international festivals, biennale, travel, these huge events, we are victim to that excess in the past. But what we are doing right now, it's a very sad ethno-nationalistic dream. We no longer travel, we no longer meet colleagues from our countries or people with whom we share values. We no longer build relationships that were built sometimes at night when we would meet after a seminar or a conference ended, because it was often after these events that new alliances were forged and new programs were developed. And the spirit of international solidarity is very difficult to maintain right now. I would like to go back to the previous question, though, because I think it is connected to this one. You asked what will stay, what's going to happen once we've been released and allowed to go out and meet our brothers and sisters, and once we've all been vaccinated, what will stay. I think in my area, I'm talking about art museums now, there is one thing that will stay for sure. I'm talking about maybe more advanced academic research programs that migrated to the internet. They will stay in the internet, and so they should. It is, well, when we talk about programs that are focused on very narrow subjects, interesting to a very narrow group of specialists, which in a normal analog situation, so to say, it would attract maybe a dozen of people. Let's say an event about electroacoustic music in 1969 and 71. I'm thinking about a very concrete lecture. Now, because it is in English and because it is available online, it attracts tens or hundreds of people, because in the world you will find much more aficionados of this subject. And maybe referring to what Christoph was saying about the carbon footprint and the problems of mobility, because the art circles, have always been very mobile, so to say. Of course, we have to ask ourselves the question whether or not it is really worthwhile to travel across the world and to hold a, I don't know, 40-minute PowerPoint presentation. Maybe in certain cases it is better to do it from home. And this is actually a positive aspect of all that. Also, we are all looking forward to meeting again, to reactivating our old alliances. That's obvious. But maybe I will wrap it up here. I know that my answer has been quite complicated. Well, in summary, there is a certain danger in reducing your work to local circles, especially that local circles are also expecting travels. And they expect that when they go to a theater or to a museum or participate in a festival, they expect to be taken for a journey without having to travel physically. They expect to learn a lot of new things. And this is something that's difficult to maintain now. As regards Steirischer Herbst, I have been a huge fan of Paranoia TV. I followed it very closely. And I think this is the best example that shows that in this situation, it is possible to revive certain old formats, such as traditional television or books or small gatherings in the open air. When we are thinking, for example, about summer camps. We are thinking about organizing summer camps as an alternative to our typical programs, formats in which a small group of people does meet physically in the forest or in the mountains in order to practice certain solutions that we remember from the past, from the 60s or 70s. So I think somewhere back in our closet or on our bookshelf, under the thick layer of dust, there are tools and instruments that will allow us to heal from the suffering of this horrible hibernation.
Christoph, will you refer to Paranoia TV?
Ja, danke für die Blumen.
Yes, thank you so much for this. We are truly happy that we were able to move this format, and we are grateful to artists that were really ready from a logical point of view, to forget about opening days. So this is all this all changed in the context of premieres that will taking place every day on that platform, and that was wonderful. It was wonderful that we sort of came away from this weekend logics. And also, I agree with Sebastian Cichocki with what he said, that the risks that are related to travel ban, and this is also related to what Pavel said, and financing. This is what we've been experiencing. We were talking to our artists from Canada and Australia, and they are supposed to work from there, and the funding there will stay nationally branded. So we are still working on it, and it's not quite clear whether it's going to look like that, but it looks like the countries that sort of support the idea of a national branding of funding. So they are supporting their artists, but on the other hand, it results in a situation where one uses the argument, well, we don't want to spread the virus, we will not be sending national projects abroad. So that's why the support, the financial support does not really take place in other countries, of projects in other countries. This involves also the situation, or this leads to a situation where we are turning even more right politically. Also, we need to think about different formats and using of different formats. And I am also sort of tired of corona pandemic, but all of us, we need to perceive it as a starting point. We've been in this situation for more than a year, and maybe we should start discussions about it and ask questions about the format. So about things, or especially about the fact that art wants to be progressive. It wants to reach new people, use new methods, and they are worked out nationally and internationally. And now we have to sort of test it and prove it. In my opinion, this progress it is more formal in a way, unfortunately. And the producers of culture, and I don't only mean here us all, but the whole landscape of cultural production. And surely this sort of implemented certain routine in the context of relevance for the system. So, and the professions that are relevant for the system can still keep working. For example, parents can still have their kids, send their kids to kindergarten. There are other relevant professions, but what does it mean, relevant for the system? How come culture is not as such relevant for the culture? And we know it is absolutely relevant. So, in my opinion, this it's really important to urgently find answers and test different options, different activities. And it's important for us to become an active part of the system and not a passive role where we are simply waiting for access. So I guess this is our role. And it's a really difficult situation. And just like Pavel mentioned, and that it's a technological Darwinism that's accelerated even more. That's accelerated things that before have never been taken into account. Before, we were just considering statistics, especially when it comes to financing. One would only take into account the number of tickets sold. And now we are facing this problem when we are talking about financing. And because it concerns the whole team. The public often doesn't know what sort of structure was necessary to bring about a given project. And so in the social, that's the problem, that social media look at just the surface. And I do follow the discussions on the social media. And suddenly people are upset and are asking how come we have this situation, how come the prices are such and short. So that's it from me. Yes, Christoph, you touched upon a very important topic, the interface between the purpose of our institution and responsibility. And we have to see both sides, Pavel. I think you are going to follow up, and Christian will take the floor in a moment. Yes, for me, I would like to follow it up from point of view of what Christoph said, namely hitting the system, namely that this pandemic has hit the system, and it appears in everything that has been said. We mentioned Christina mentioned small events in the garden. Christoph mentioned that there is a premiere every day and there's a launch every day. So this is not a capitalistic system anymore, a system of big events and big funds. On the one hand, we have a pandemic which forces us to limit and reduce the number of those events. On the other hand, these events are not a commodity anymore. It's been always difficult for me to say that a launch of a play in the theater was a commodity, that we were selling the commodity. Our being with the public, just like in the museums, is sort of a process. Just like Christoph said that they used to have launch every weekend, and now it's every day. So this means that we are in this process. And Christoph asked about the professions, which are more important, which are less important. During the pandemic, it turns out that the market stops working. And in fact, those are important who are really important. So in a capitalist system, what is really important is safety and security, healthcare, education. These are the things that are often not marketable. They are not covered by the market, but they are a business of the whole public, of the whole society. And suddenly it turns out that the culture, which is not just an event, it's not just a market, it's important for everyone, but it's particularly important and it's protected. We can see this based on freelancers who do not have any financial background, and in fact institutions are important, and working for institutions is important. A stable job, security, social security, and a social offer for people. So it's not only about marketing offer. And I think everybody realized that in Poland, everybody had a job in a theater, a full-time job in a theater. But now there are a lot of freelance people, and they say, hello, excuse me, we want to have a full-time job. We thought we would be operating on this market, but now we want to have a full-time job. And now they have different tasks. They don't create commodities that they can sell to those institutions, but they create relationships, and they work with people, and they can do small events, they can do events in the forest, or things that develop relations, and they are not just sales of commodity. Christiane. I take it you wanted to follow up on this topic of responsibility and social offer. Yes. Yes. In fact, I wanted, well, Paweł has already talked about this, but I wanted to mention something that Sebastian talked about. We cannot forget that this situation demands a lot of us, and there are a lot of bans. In Austria, you can meet with other people, you can demonstrate, but most of demonstrations that are taking place right now are anti-corona, anti-pandemic demonstration, where people take to the streets without masks. But please, let's not forget, and it was also mentioned on TV and on the radio, that in Poland, abortion has been totally banned, and a lot of people took to the streets. And where can people protest if they cannot go out to the streets? So I want to remind you that we live in Europe today, and Poland is the best example of that. Where institutions were changed, people in the institutions were exchanged, simply things have changed. And another example is Hungary. And these are the facts that have already been happening before Corona, but the pandemic has accelerated these things. And what Christoph said about the precarious situation of artists, back in 2019, there was this campaign organized by artist unions, Fair Pay, and Pay Artists Now. Of course, it was made even worse by the pandemic, because who has a permanent job in an institution? Well, we have it, but thousands of other colleagues who are artists, and they work with us, but they work under precarious conditions, and they have little money at hand. And there were those two campaigns in Austria, Pay the Artist Now and Fair Pay. And there was also a big solidarity campaign back in 2019. You know this, Christoph. And what was the outcome? It concerned the work in the theater. And it was also all about tolerance, about politicians mixing in cultural programs. And this was a campaign that started already in 2019. So my opinion is that a lot of problems that we've touched upon today, they already existed before the pandemic. The pandemic has accelerated a lot of things, made a lot of things worse, and covered up a lot of things. And we simply cannot forget about this.
Ich schreibe im Chat diese Info von den Kampagnen.
Okay, I'm just going to write the names of the campaigns in the chat box.
No właśnie, pandemia też.
Yes. The pandemic has actually brought to light problems that we had been seeing for quite some time. The problems we see now did exist before. And we have also heard many voices saying that this crisis must not be wasted. And I think it's an appeal to our sense of responsibility. And this is also my next question. How do you see it in different countries? Because probably it will be different from country to country. Christiane addressed it a little bit when she talked about fair pay for artists. Also, there are different solutions in terms of insurance for artists. In Poland, it has not been regulated for years now, and now that the pandemic has struck, the situation has become truly dramatic. I know that steps have been taken in order to change the system. Can you tell us a little bit about it? What have your institutions been doing?
Pawle, ty za chwilę Forum Przyszłości
Paweł, you're about to open the Future of Culture Forum. Oh yes, the forum is coming. We are going to talk about the social and political challenges faced by Poland and the world. Of course, we are going to talk about it on the internet, and I think it is a kind of answer to what has been happening in the streets and actually keeps happening, although not on such a large scale as before. Alexandra mentioned that I'm the chairman of the Guild of Polish Directors. This is a union of freelance artists, freelance directors. As a director and also theater manager of the theater, I have been following very closely what this trade union has been doing. It is actually been run by a group of very young artists, and on their example, I can see how difficult the situation has been. The guild was established 3 years ago. Directors rarely cooperate with one another because they often have very strong personalities and they believe they know better than everyone else. Maybe it's just, part of the job. For this reason, cooperation was very difficult at the beginning, but since the pandemic started, the trade union has been taken over by young people who have been raised in a different way, not in this cult or blind belief in the market, and they've become very involved. They are fighting for better protection of directors. The situation in Poland is difficult for political reasons. So is the situation in Hungary. However, the current government is quite sensitive to social problems. And in contrast to previous governments, which were rather liberal, now it is easier to talk about insurance and providing artists with more security. Now it is possible to achieve something, especially that during the pandemic, people have realized that we have to rethink. Artists tend to complain that they are not offered employment, they have to sign civil law contracts. Actually, before the pandemic, it was difficult to find someone ready to be employed because they said they were free spirits. The pandemic has changed it. They think about it differently now. Would anyone else like to address the challenges? I would like to, well, first of all, I would like to agree with Paweł in saying that as institutions, we should provide certain services to artists and support them. But taking a broader view on that, and also in the context of your questions about chances brought by the pandemic, it seems to me that humans as a species have wasted even better chances than this one in the past. So we cannot exclude a situation in which we will waste this chance as well. We should not be thinking about the pandemic and the spread of the virus as something totally unexpected, that we have not been warned by scientists in advance, etc. I think we will be able to cope with the pandemic. This is not the last pandemic we are going to see in this century anyway, but what we are probably not going to be able to cope with is the ecological crisis, the climate crisis. This pandemic is just one of the symptoms of a sick planet or sick relationship between us and non-human beings. This is not something we are allowed to neglect when we work in our institutions, when we design the future of our institutions, when we think about the development architecture and the purposes they should serve. And I'm thinking about a science fiction story I read before the pandemic started. It talked about a world that was actually deep in destruction. So the entire ecosystem has been pushed out of balance, and they are small tribes of people living in abandoned airports to find any sort of shelter for these surviving thousands of humans. But even in this situation, art continues to exist. And this art is actually very similar to creating gardens or permacultures. They create new ecosystems, enter complicated relationships with fungi or lichen, and it was quite interesting. It showed me that we have a lot to learn from other disciplines, but at the same time, artists, people working in literature, visual arts, fine arts, films, etc., have a lot to offer to other disciplines, other areas of human knowledge as well. First of all, by igniting or by triggering their imagination. We keep talking about the dying imagination, and what it's going to take to rethink the world is going to be imagination. What we need is an explosion of imagination, and we believe it's possible when we work together with Paweł Łysak and Teatr Powszechny and with many other institutions. We see that there are a lot of institutions that take artistic imagination seriously because it has explosive power. Christoph, did you want to add something?
Ja, ich denke auch.
Yes. I would like to thank the other speakers. I would like to address the question of coming together, but not only in physical terms, but also organized work on social transformation. It's like in a Wage for Work or other European initiatives. It is highly relevant, and actually it is also delayed because we live in the bubble of art, of artists. And I'm not only talking about artists, but also other people linked to art. We have to take a closer look at how they are paid for their work. And it is not going to be about permanent employment only, because I agree with Paweł, it is difficult. It is possible to create a program and say that in your institutions, you will employ people for long-term contracts, and they will keep working. You will keep working with the same people over and over again. That's not possible. Probably we have to think about new systems. For example, residency-based system in which institutions will be more involved in programs that are more advanced than Erasmus, but and they are more permanent than very short study visits when you go to a city and have a look around and then offer something that probably doesn't make much sense. It's important that the pandemic has shown very clearly the urgency of these problems. As an institution, we know that we are faced with these problems. We've seen it for quite a few years: audience development, ecology and economy, and related aspects. And we are faced with the question how we are going to deal with it. We started offering festivals that are actually slower than what we are used to, and institutions that run classical museums, for example, are trying to rethink as well. And it really makes sense to listen and ask for inspirations from colleagues who don't work in renowned institutions, who work in smaller institutions, who have to be on their toes most of the time. And due to that, they can be more active or more dynamic. The fundamental question is, the one about how cultural production can contribute to the society, can or actually has to. And we know that there are considerable problems that we are facing nowadays, developing new programs, trying to hear all the relevant voices. We are no longer allowed to invite artists in person, and we no longer have a chance of direct cooperation. We have to rely on the virtual world, which adds another problems and another topic that should be discussed in this virtual space. Yes, thank you for saying that. You mentioned that it's important to listen to other institutions, smaller institutions. I think it's very interesting. I think maybe we should go even further. It's not only about listening, but maybe establishing relationships as well. Christiana, I think you wanted to add something. We will be drawing to a close soon because we agreed to keep it down to 90 minutes. Yes, I would like to address the question on artists. Artists actually have been showing us ways of dealing with crises over and over again in the past. So we should be listening to them because they are the ones who have been working with close local communities in groups for many years now. They were the ones ready to leave institutions in the 80s and the 90s to get involved with the community. I think the spark came from artists. That's why we should listen to them more carefully, and we should allow them to speak more and more. I would like to address the question of ecology as well. I think we have to look at our ideas and concepts. Ecofeminism was an important topic in the past, in late 70s and in the 80s. Some of these ideas are still valid. We have to look at them again and ask how we want to work with them in the 21st century. I'm not prone to pessimism with regard to further developments after the pandemic. We just have to look at what's going to happen. We have to stay with the trouble. We are responsible for the situation that we have because it has been caused by humans. So now we have to make sure we learn to deal with it. We should not see it as a sort of apocalyptic event that was brought upon us by someone. So in this misery, we have to keep working. We cannot just say, okay, it's too much, I'm leaving. Okay, what you have said actually goes in line with one of the comments to what Paweł Wysak said when he talked about it, that online costs less money, and that we should not stop thinking in this way but we have to redefine values instead and choose the things that bring value and not focus on the way of presentation, whether or not it is appealing or not.
Stanisław, you wanted to ask one last question. Yes, I have one last question to all of the participants at the very end, because I've been thinking for a long time about different institutions that are represented in our meeting. Before the meeting, I was looking at different institutions and what they've been doing this past year. And my impression is, and I got inspired by the background behind me, it's a virtual background showing our seat. And so behind Sebastian, you can see a real background, a real mosaic on the wall. And I see this risk that institutions of culture in COVID times will become a virtual or a virtual thing or a background, someone where you broadcast from, a broadcasting studio of sorts, and they will lose this role of an institution that has different objectives. And I was thinking in this context about museums and Universal Pictures or Columbia Studio, which shows artifacts that everybody knows, but they only know it from the big screen. You can see a shark that was shown in Jaws, or dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. And my question is, what do we do about it? What should institutions do? And I'm looking very much into distant future. It's a sci-fi perspective. And so if we were to be present in utopian science fiction, if we were to stay in this reality, what should we do to make sure that our institutions never become a background, a collection of artifacts that someone will come to see, but they will be deactivated, relic of the past, something everybody knows from the screen or Netflix or from somewhere else? Paweł. Yes, I have a very short answer. You have to build relations at any price. That's the answer to everything. Inside the institution and with other institutions. So I think relations are the opposite of artifacts, actors in shopping windows. So that's it from me. Yes, I would like to defend dinosaurs and those different artifacts collected in museums and different institutions. And I would like to refer to science. There are different great studies and papers, a great book among others by a cognitivist at Vanoe called Strange Tools. And it talks about different functions and different measures that these strange objects play. Strange objects being works of art, and they have this unclear status of a work of art. And this panned out really well during pandemic. Art
na przykład w lepszym zdrowiu psychicznym. I to jest jakby
gives us better mental health, and it's a matter of confronting things that we don't understand, that are strange, hermetic, that open us up to other ways of contacting the world, living and not living things, objects. So this has a very good impact on how we feel, on whether we want to face the reality, whether we want to change it, whether we want to be together in many different ways. We're not afraid of aliens. We're not afraid of something we don't understand. So yes, being with dinosaurs, yes. Yes, I'm glad that we had this optimistic tone because we started with some endospores, so it sheds some light on this topic, and I'm glad that all of you mentioned responsibility of culture, role of culture, and stimulating imagination. Olga Tokarczuk also talks about it, and yes, we play this role too. I hope that we never forget about what's key and about our missions. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you to the interpreters, Magdalena Mielicka, Marta Brudny, Maciej Skondek, and Jarosław Sobczak, and technical guys, Dominika Pyzowska, Bartosz Rydnicki, and Bartosz Serafin. Thank you so much for your support, and see you, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately still virtually, but live. So hopefully we'll be able to come back to mobility, and that hybrid sort of helps us function in both worlds.